Been there, done that.
I know. So that was what page is that? Code ID question on? Like the one that's
577. There's a short answer question on 577. Remember, that's basically 3 short IDs.
Right.
3, so 9 sentences total.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about McCarthyism. It talks McCarthyism, the second red square, the red square. Going to the Kremlin. Red scare. And I'm going to tell you about the reasons how that came about. Did we get through?
Yeah, you were on imperial presidency.
Oh, so we got to the imperial presidency. We were talking about the shadow government.
Yeah. National security.
Oh, national security. So we got through that. And the president's power increased. And this is not just it. We got this national security state. But what was the plan to economically aid Western Europe? Marshall Plan, which is kind of a continuation of Lend-Lease. And also, no politician after the Truman Doctrine would want to be what? Yeah. Do we need the military spending?
No.
So the U.S. dramatically increased or began to increase, not really until 1950, but and the U.S. started the peacetime draft. The United States, for the first time in its history, started selective service, a draft. Not a full draft like in war. It was pretty selective. Local draft boards would just pick a few people, which would be very unfair because that leads to the Vietnam War. And it also caught something called war socialism, with the idea, basically, the government is going to give really big contracts to defense contractors so they stay in business, just in case. So all these airplane companies like Convair or McDonnell or Douglas, which a lot of them eventually would combine, but these are all companies in the 1950s, or Grumman or Lockheed. And I'm not worried about this one, but here is one that's actually 69. But the defense budget is going to become essentially almost a wholly part of the budget. And here is defense spending with a nice code, and domestic needs are going to become second. And in the budget process, ever since this law, defense budget is first and everything else is second. In fact, it's basically, we're going to do the defense budget and then we'll see what we have left for everything else. And that's the way they still do it to this day. And that is radically different than the history of the United States. It was not like that before. And for what? Yeah.
For war socialism, the government gave money to
defense contractors.
Oh.
You basically made a bunch of orders to make sure they'd stay in business.
Okay.
The idea being, well, we do have war. We better make sure we have companies ready to go. World War II took a long time. And the thing about this is a lot of this fears seem to be confirmed by what we're going to call the Berlin blockade. Now think about the Allied occupation zones. So the French, the British, and the American occupation zones. They need a stable economic system 3 years after the war. And they finally decided they have to make a common currency. It's going to be called the Deutschmark, a common currency, or the mark, which would go away when they start the euro. The European Union did that in 2002. And so with that, the problem is this. A country cannot have an economy, a stable system of finance or government unless there's a common currency. But the problem is, once they decide that all three of these zones will have a common currency, in essence, they've created a country. And the country will be soon known as West Germany. Actually, it's pretty amazing. West Germany, they put the capital in this tiny little town right here called Bonn on the Rhine River, with the idea being that when the Germany's reunified someday down the road, they'll leave this little town. And so now Bonn is this town with these massive government buildings, and no one's there. It's really kind of weird. It's like a well-kept up Butte. Butte's kind of falling apart. Bonn, they maintain these beautiful buildings. There's no one there. But the Soviets were furious. They're going to arm them and send them back. And he decided, if you want your West Germany, how did I do that? On that note, goodbye.
You heard it. It was live.
Aliens?
The world's
Oh,
most
I would be very sad if this is the way I brought it, because the last two I brought because they got wrong. Whoa! Hey! Oh. Whoa! We got stuff.
It's gonna be.
No, but I guess it's going to be a race. Also, there'll be like 5 seconds gone. Okay. His greatest fear is that Germany would be rearmed by the West and sent back. And so Stalin decided, all right, if you want your West Germany, you're going to have to give up something. What are they going to have to give up? Berlin. And so he blockaded Berlin. Just the land routes. So the land routes, which are here, here, and here. And they correspond generally with air routes over them. Now, didn't cut off the air routes, but he never dreamed that they could resupply to some 20,000 soldiers and 3 million Berliners by the air. And so, yes, he's acting tough, but this is a real act of desperation. But to many in the West, it seemed like he was trying to swallow up this part of Berlin, soon to be known as West Berlin, on a path to take the whole thing. This is one of those situations where Stalin just assumed this was an effort for World War III with Germany attacking again. And the Western Allies thought this is the beginning of World War III with Stalin trying to take Germany. Yes. Yeah, it's going to be called West Berlin. When I was a kid, it was East and West Germany, East and West Berlin.
Is that what we called it? Or did it like
Everybody did. It was West Berlin. Yeah. And there are a lot of benefits for living in West Berlin because nobody wanted to live there. And so, for example, young men in West Germany, they wouldn't be drafted into the West German army if they lived in West Berlin. So, the United States, in a way, Truman and Attlee, remember Attlee's the prime minister of Britain? They called Stalin's bluff. They decided to do an airlift. Nobody knew how long the airlift would be, but they began to airlift supplies, and it would turn out to be 10 months, well into 1949. By the way, isn't this a great cartoon? By the way, isn't there a black bear roaming the countryside right now? Yep.
That's crazy.
That's why I knocked that down to scare the bear away. You're welcome. Yes.
I went through a newspaper we went to Montana Wild to talk to them about it, and the hole that it escaped out of was like this big. And they like don't know when it escaped, like because it was last night, like anytime between like 6 p.m. yesterday and 8 p.m. this morning it left.
That narrows it down.
Yep.
And it's like 7,000-pound bear, if I remember right.
No, yeah, and it's angry. It's angry. It's like 240 pounds. Yeah, it's not great.
So the bear and mountain lion are in cahoots together?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
the worst?
All right, so back to this. After some initial problems, eventually there became a carpet, a continuous flight in day and night, flying into the 3 airfields. There's 1 airfield in each occupation zone. And this is at Tempelhof. And you'll notice they're standing on ruins. Berlin was just a big ruin. And they bulldozed them into hills. And so if you go to Berlin, there are about 4 of these massive hills. Now they're covered with grass and trees, and it's just rubble. All from the destroyed buildings. It's actually really kind of weird. One, it's a zoo. There are animals, and there's like an aviary on it. And it's surreal. But, and they brought, the big thing is not only the food, but the coal for heat for the winter. That is the thing that just shocked everybody. They're able to get that coal. And they also dropped candy off to the children. So, and you can imagine the Germans really did not like the American or the British. Of course, they don't like the French. There's a lot of animosity there. We're occupying them. This would alleviate some of that because of the Berlin airlift. They were willing to do whatever it took to keep the Soviets out because they were terrified of the Soviets. Not completely, but it did alleviate some. And after 10 months, Stalin backed down. All of a sudden, all the bridges on the roads were repaired immediately, and supplies began to flow. Stalin was humiliated, but not too much. Most of his people didn't know, and it wasn't that big of a deal. To the United States, Truman could act like he stood tough, but still, West Berlin is still over there. But the country of West Germany will be created. This is basically where it comes out of. And that was a very provocative role. And here's a couple different pictures. I love this cartoon of Stalin and the bird, this flying in the food. And then this is an advertisement. They made the containers. And they show a weapon for democracy as is implying to the Berlin airlift. And if you ever give it a chance to go to Berlin, go to the Berlin Story Museum. They have a great museum about this. The Berlin airlift, it's really cool. I won't let you take pictures in it. And then they have an old Cold War era bomb shelter. And it was, I think, the scariest thing I've ever been in. Just you let your imagination run. Think about an area about the size of something about as big as about two gyms for 5,000 people for a month. I don't even want to tell you, but you could probably guess where the water was going to come from after week 2. Yeah, this was all planned. It was pitch black. It was just bed, like 7 beds stacked up in row. It was. I tried to get pictures of that, but all I got were shadows. It was dark. Yeah. No, the company's in Colorado. So we'll support a free Colorado, but basically it's anti-communist. This is going to lead to the creation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization might sound like a peace, like a conference get together for peace treaty. No, it's the biggest military alliance ever created. The U.S., for the first time in its history, got entangled in a foreign military alliance, NATO. It was created out of the Cold War, but it still exists today. It's very anachronistic. It's out of place. All the countries in dark blue joined it initially, including Canada and the U.S., but you'll notice in light blue, more countries came in, like Turkey, Greece, fascist Spain, and West Germany. By 1955, Germany began to rearm, and they'd have 1 million men in uniform by the end of the decade. Soon be making the best tanks in the world. And so with that, the Soviets would respond in 1955 with the Warsaw Pact. And the Warsaw Pact, all the countries behind the Iron Curtain, the countries in red. When I was a kid, it was always Warsaw Pact versus NATO. And they would show the different units and how big the armies were. And the Warsaw Pact always had more, even though it was really misleading. The Soviets never threw anything away. So they had all the old tanks from World War II, which couldn't have been used in 1980, but they still counted them. But the U.S. now is involved in a military alliance in Europe. This is a radical change. 46, we're home, it's over. 49, we're committed to Europe, and soon we'll be committed to virtually every place in the world. This is big. And so, at the same time, the Bretton Woods Conference would be an international financial meeting. And there's a couple things we'll get to a little bit later on. But the thing we need to know is this. They don't want any more financial panics. Avoid panics. Because the depression this would cause seemed to lead to up and down fascism, and I forgot one, obviously, and either fascism or communism on either end. So not only the panic and the depression and unemployment, but the insecurity of those systems led people to be more susceptible to fascism or communism. And so this is mostly in the West, but the idea was we'll create this stable international financial system where money will be based upon the dollar. The U.S., the economy was, relative to the rest of the world, was bigger than it had ever been or will ever be after World War II. I mean, think about all the economic competitors of the U.S. Britain, France, Germany, Japan, devastated by the war. So the U.S. is like, they call it standing like a colossus atop the world. And so what they did is they put They based every currency would be based on the dollar. And the dollar would be convertible to gold. Gold's kind of a gold system, gold standard, but not quite. This would end in 1971. But also, everyone agreed to essentially, we will adopt Keynesian economic principles. And this is going to be virtually every country in the West. Western Europe, the United States, and Japan. That means stimulating demand, trying to make a much broader middle class out of working class, so more people not only benefit from society, but the big thing you have to get is this: feel secure. Because if people feel insecure, that's when fascism sounds pretty good. That's when communism sounds pretty good. So this was not just an economic policy. This is political. So liberal economics, yeah.
Who was that from?
Virtually every financial minister of all the countries fighting Germany. Even the Soviet Union was there, but they, of course, did not participate after the war. And virtually every country then would form some kind of social democracy, where they're going to combine socialist principles with a regulated capitalistic system. And the best example of this would be virtually all the countries of Western Europe. But the best examples like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, France. Those countries.
They're combining social principles with what?
Socialist principles with regulated capitalism. The US, Britain was always kind of wavering back and forth between pure socialism and the exact opposite. And the United States did some principles of social democracy, like Social Security and minimum wage.
Was that the conference?
Yeah, that's a conference. It's a mountain resort in New York City. I've never actually been there. I guess it's just beautiful. I was close, but I didn't have time to go. I guess it's just really neat. Huh?
There's that many people.
That's just the foreign ministers. There were significantly more aides. There's probably over 1,000 there. You know, all the people, all the aides, and all the. And one more thing we should add: the Bretton Woods deal started to fall apart in the 70s. Lots of things happened, but the reemergence of conservative economics would begun. And you can see this all over, even though the social democracies still remain in Europe. Much of the social democratic principles in the US and Britain would go away. And also the growth of neoliberalism, which is a kind of a hybrid conservative economic liberal social idea. And the hierarchy of the Democratic Party would become neoliberal. The Republicans would become almost solely conservative. But the last two Democratic presidents were neoliberal economically, Obama and Clinton. This is changing. It appears to be changing. And social democracy is more popular, but so is fascism. So we're in an interesting time. Just sit back and watch and enjoy the fun. Yes? Neoliberal is, the big thing you need to know is conservative economics. Social on domestic issues, but did I say liberal economics? Conservative economics. Neoliberalism is conservative economics. And with that, what of the post-war America? Right after the war, a couple things happened. There was a real concern about what to do with veterans. Even before the war ended, Democrats, liberal Democrats and liberal Republicans over conservative Republicans and Democrats got the GI Bill passed. You might know the GI Bill. It's still there, it's still the law today. GI means soldiers.
You can get loans.
It's part some loans, help for loans if you're a veteran.
Some of it with college.
You get much of your tuition paid for college. In fact, that's one of the ways, because the United States now has a volunteer army, that's one of the big things that get people to join. You join the army, you get college. And also the healthcare, the VA, which good healthcare, but chronically underfunded as it is today. That seems to be the norm. And yeah, this goes completely against conservative economics, so that's why conservatives were opposed. But the GI Bill would be successful. Because think about it. Also, you have 12 million men and women out of uniform, but a significant number will not have to immediately look for a job because they go to college. and go to college would take pressure off of the economy. And at the same time, you're going to have a whole pool of highly skilled, highly trained workers ready to enter the workforce in the 1950s. It more than paid back for itself. In fact, it increased the economy dramatically because of this. I know a lot of people who are veterans of that era. World War II, one of the big things was they can go to school. Such a big deal. And I have a lot of friends and now a lot of former students who joined the Army because of that. Or joined the military because of the GI Bill. Especially considering the cost of college. So with that, there was a post-war depression, but not as bad as not as bad as after World War I. There was high inflation and there was unemployment because they're converting to peacetime work, but not as bad. They did better controlling it. But depression, the war's over, tired of Democrats. In the midterm election, the Republicans did very well. For the first time since 1930, Republicans had a slight majority in the House and the Senate. And that would not happen again until 1980, when the Democrats really begin to fade. Even though they're still a bigger party, they just faded. And with that, a lot of conservative Republicans were overjoyed. Now we can attack the New Deal. We can get rid of the New Deal. But I put a question mark. Because liberal Republicans and liberal Democrats understood one thing. The New Deal was really popular. People liked Social Security. They liked the fact that there were unions and all of a sudden had crazy things like weekends and higher wages. People liked the fact that they didn't have to send their 10-year-olds to work. So they liked the Fair Labor Standard Act. They liked the minimum wage. They liked the 40-hour work week. So they liked these things. So Republicans desperately wanted to get rid of Social Security and the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is the minimum wage of child labor. But they did get one thing done, with conservative Democrats and conservative Republicans unified to pass the TaftHartley Act, an intensely anti-union bill that they passed over. They overrode Truman's veto. Remember, it requires 2/3 of a vote. So that means a significant number of conservative, mostly Southern Democrats voted. Their big logic, they didn't want blacks in unions. This would severely erode unions, but it would not be really noticed until the 1980s, when a very anti-union conservative president named Ronald Reagan took power. And the federal government openly attacked labor unions, and then it became just, okay, companies realized unions have no support, and they began to peck away at it. Where today, unions are much, much weaker. And with that, that's a big deal. Taft-Hartley is still the law of the land today. The Wagner Act is still law, but Taft-Hartley amended it. So remember, the Wagner Act started labor unions. And that's why the election of 1948 is going to be a big one. The Republicans assumed that the imbecile Truman is going to lose. And the Democrats would not like to run Truman. In fact, Truman didn't want to run again. But he's not going to back down. He actually offered it to Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower's in command of all U.S. forces in Europe still. He asked Eisenhower, said, if you want it, you got the Democratic nomination. Eisenhower not only said no, Eisenhower never really voted. He didn't even know what party he was in. What's ironic about that? Yeah, 4 years later, he would decide, I guess I'm going to be a liberal Republican. And he decided he wanted to run for president. It's really kind of funny. So, Truman's program, he gave it the name the Fair Deal. See, you get it? New Deal, Fair Deal. So we have the Square Deal, New Deal, Fair Deal. Kennedy would keep the new. And he was a liberal Democrat. He called his the New Frontier. Anybody know what Johnson would call his? He's Lyndon Johnson. He's going to get the Great Society. Eisenhower is going to be dynamic conservatism. I like that. Slogan's a slogan, right? And the three biggest parts of the Fair Deal were this. Education. Kind of like the GI Bill, but it'd be massive help, massive government aid for public education, K through 12, and also tuition-free college. Thankfully, that didn't happen. I'm with you. And so with that, no. So I think you're gonna get the point of none of this happened. But
We don't.
yeah, you guys know if you don't know, boy, will you find out. Yes.
What do you think right now?
Just say it again. This is what I do, education. And it kind of boils it out of the GI Bill, that's why I put it there. So aid for education, next. National health insurance. So it'd be the government would provide health insurance and it'd be funded through a payroll tax like Social Security. And everybody would have health insurance, even though the hospitals, that would still be private or nonprofit. Much like what Medicare is for the elderly, that was passed at 65, or Canada. It'd be a little bit like Canada. And it was pretty clear after World War II of two big things. Healthcare was actually effective and shockingly expensive. So most people could not afford it. And all you have to do is look at a hospital bill and you know what I'm talking about. Especially look at an overnight stay. It is unreal how expensive it is in this country. Yeah. Yeah. Ambulances. And like in an airlift, $60,000. And I made a mistake here. Somehow this wasn't supposed to come up the way it did. But President Truman actually was for civil rights. A Southerner. In fact, that's part of the reason why Southern Democrats got him on the ticket in '44. Yet he desegregated the military and wanted he wanted equal civil rights. What? So he desegregated the military. That's what I put there. And what's the laws of segregated South? What are those called again? Jim Crow laws. And what was that law? It was just this rigged law so that basically slaves could not vote. That grandfather's clause. He wanted that gone. Think about it. This is a Southerner. He's a Southerner. And he wanted this, and this cartoon shows it pretty well. He's going to stand pat. So he's going to stick with civil rights, even though this, I'm not sure what she's supposed to be, but it's supposed to be a Southern belle. You mean you'd rather be right than president? And Truman was going to stand by his principles because Southern Democrats went nuts over this. Went nuts over the fair deal. Yeah.
It's supposed to be Truman. It looks like Truman. His face, he's got glasses.
It kind of does. You think
It's supposed to be Truman. They're making fun of it by calling him a girl.
I think you might be right. And it's a mirror. I think you're right. I did not see a mirror.
Yeah.
So basically, it's shockingly sexist too.
Yeah.
So he wanted to get rid of the grandfather's clause?
Yeah, wanted to get rid of the grandfather's clause and Jim
Desegregate
Crow.
the military?
But he did desegregate the military. So he proved he was going to do it. That was an executive order. So the president could, because there's already a law about the military. And he also desegregated the federal government, which Woodrow Wilson did back in 1913. It'd be President Truman who would desegregate the Lincoln Memorial, which the irony is so strong on the Lincoln Memorial being segregated that it's just.
So it's actually mocking him?
Yeah. Well, kind of. It's that he's being a man here. And a woman would back down because women aren't as tough. So it's, like I said, shockingly sexist. So, what did Southern Democrats do? They walked out and did their own party, the States' Rights Party. This should sound familiar. By the way, these are flags. This should sound familiar. 1860 Democrats did the same thing. They did not want Stephen Douglas. And so Southern Democrats nominated, you remember who Southern Democrats nominated? John C. Breckinridge. And Breckinridge. So the Democrats split over civil rights. They started the States' Rights Party, what everybody knew. States' rights was code for segregation. Just like before the Civil War, states' rights was code for slavery. They also called themselves the Dixiecrats. And that's what the governments after the Civil War were called in the South. So this has a lot of Confederate roots. They picked the governor of South Carolina, the segregationist Democrat Strom Thurmond, who would then go to the Senate and serve until 2003. Yes, he was 101 years old. But he died as a senator. And segregation. Segregation, period. And they brought back the Confederate battle flag. That made a reappearance. And the Confederate battle flag, after 1948, became a symbol of one thing: segregation. It became a symbol of not allowing all Americans to have equal rights. They didn't hide it. That's what it meant. That's what it became a symbol of. South Carolina, and during this election, put the Confederate flag and put that over their state capitol instead of the U.S. flag. And states like Tennessee did kind of a hybrid Confederate flag on their state flag, things like that. So, Southern Party split. Here is the convention. You see the Confederate battle flag, Confederate battle flag. And I want to give you an idea exactly where Strom Thurmond was coming from, so I'll write you a little quote. So the Confederate battle flag then for all the way, well, from then on, will be used as a symbol to fight against equal rights. And Strom Thurmond is actually going to have a very important another historical fact about him, besides the fact that he served until he was 101 years old in the Senate. He'd be one of the first Southern Democrats to become a Republican, because the Republican Party came out against the Civil Rights Act. So when the Republican Party became the party, ironically, considered Lincoln, against equal rights, he'd be the first of a wave of Southern Democrats who would all become Republicans. Just a wave of them. You'll see it in the future. So the Democrats aren't done splitting up. Progressive Democrats picked former Vice President Henry Wallace for a progressive party. So we have two temporary third and fourth parties. They thought Truman wasn't doing enough. So here's Truman trying to lead the democracy, the Democrats, through Wallace and Thurmond. G and Ha are, I know a lot of you plow fields. So when you have the mule out there, G is right, Ha is left. Mules understand that, they speak well. And who's ridden a mule? Am I the only one who's ridden a mule? Who's eaten mule?
My dad has some around.
I've eaten, yeah, I've had a mule and a horse. I were tough. I was in France. My choices were horse or a calf's brain. I'm not making that up. Yes. Huh? Yeah. That is. So, Wallace thought the Truman Doctrine was going to lead to World War III. So the Democrats are split now in three. The Republicans just have to show up with a candidate who won't drool on himself in public, and they're probably going to get the presidency. Just like Lincoln got it in 1860. They chose the man who did not lose. Oh, and the last poll, a month of the election, had Wallace getting 10% of the vote. Wallace was really popular, especially in the Northeast. And so, Thomas Dewey ran against Roosevelt in 44 and lost. He was a liberal Democrat, though, and conservative Democrats were furious. He was a former DA of New York. He arrested he convicted a bunch of mob bosses. That's how he became famous. Did I say Republican? Did I say Democrats? Yeah. He was a liberal Republican. They don't exist anymore. And here he is running for president. Here are the polls. Truman in this cartoon and Dewey are looking at polls, and the polls had Truman losing big. Everybody thought Truman would lose. But Dewey ran a non-campaign because he didn't want to make a mistake. He didn't even remember red baiting. People said, yeah, accuse him of being a communist. The Berlin airlift's going on right now. He didn't do it. And he had no emotions. This is a famous story about this picture where the live photographer asked him to smile. And he, of course, said, I am. That was the best he could get. People said he looked like the little man on the wedding cake.
Oh.
Yeah.
Only one person thought Harry Truman would win.
Very true.
He understood how much people liked the New Deal. And he campaigned that Republicans are going to get rid of the New Deal, which they said they were going to. He said Republicans are going to bring back the same wealthy, Gilded Age politics that led to the Great Depression. And he ran the last of the old campaigns. He did a whistle-stop campaign from city to city and gave speeches where you get people all fired up. And somebody in the audience would always yell, "Give him hell, Harry!" And he'd say, "If you send me back, I will." And the whole place would cheer. And this is the last campaign for TV. The Democratic and Republican conventions that year were the first major political functions ever shown on TV, and just basically the East Coast. By 1952, television was nationwide, and television will change everything. So, the election that nobody thought Truman would win, not only did Truman win, he won pretty well. And the Democrats did fantastic. This was considered the biggest political upset in history. I think you can make a very solid argument that 2016 will also fit in that. Yeah. They're very close. And that's pretty similar. Nobody thought Dewey would win. But look at these states. The Southern Democratic bloc was starting to fall apart. And it would fall apart beginning in the 1960s over civil rights. Yes?
Truman.
Yeah, he did.
Did I say Dewey?
Yes, he did.
I meant Truman. I was trying to look at something. And here's really a famous ad. Here's the Chicago Tribune printed millions of copies of they wanted to be the first one out there with the Dewey victory. So of course Truman got this and ha ha! On the what? Oh, well, it's one of the most famous pictures in American political history. Oh, so whenever they have a fake headline. Yeah. All right, everybody, you have a little bit. Don't forget, first 5 minutes, that quick little brainstorm outlining thesis.
Come on.
Yeah, come on, people.
No, come on.
It kind of reminds me of like videos where you see athletes celebrating before they like finish their race and trip.
Yeah, they trip or fumble or
Right,
yeah.
Whenever I tell you I like your
They start celebrating, someone passes them. Yeah,
Exactly.
Okay, Mr. Parker, you have a question.
The answer is 7.
Oh, okay.
Well, so on my I have 98, and then you changed it to a 95, and I didn't have mistake.
No, it was a 95. It was great. I made it terrible.
What are your leaders?
You did really well, though.
It was taking my first what did I do wrong?
No, it wasn't. It was just a terrible one.
Say like adventure qualities, like you could say.
Yeah, that's stretching. Yeah, that's the old fallout shelter water in case of nuclear war.
Oh.
I got 2 of them. It was a plastic bag.
So you're gonna do great.
17
Alright, now it's trash man.
Yeah, next one. History.
Well, you're gonna throw it away? No, I'll use it. It's awesome.
It's so good.
Hey, Mr. Parker,
Yeah.
could I try to see you?
Yeah, in fact, it should be on the top of the 3rd period basket. Okay.
It's very nice.
I also need to wear yours to try. We just have a little.
I saw one of those for sale, but it was literally, I think, like $5,000. And I bet it's a lot more now.
How many copies of those are there?
Well, they put them out. They sent them out. They're like 4 million. Because it was one of the biggest daily newspapers in America. So it's all over Chicago and the Midwest.
So we were supposed to have 2 newspapers.
Yes.
Right? And am I passing them both at the same time or giving one?
What we did is yesterday we went through. Yeah, we're going to pass them all, and then I'll just collect them all. But everyone gave a brief little talk about theirs, and then we let people look at theirs.
All right.
So we'll finish it up today. There's so some people have to go.
Oh, you do?
I think I need it. Is it my fault? Okay. You're going to go far enough. We still have a few more presentations, and then we are maybe going to start the movie today or tomorrow. We're going to watch. Want to know?
Yes. I want to.
How's that on Glenn or Glenda? We're not going to watch Glenn or Glenda. Remember that one? That's the horrible, horrible Ed Wood movie.
Are we watching?
Well, we're going to finish up our. Anybody find the bear?
What bear?
It's probably in my neighborhood.
There's a bear running wild.
Yeah,
Hear about the
there's a bear that's been released.
Well, they didn't release it. Hey, go, here you go. Have fun.
Yeah, it's fine. Correct.
No, yeah, right there. This will not hurt you. You will, well, it's good. Third period out class, what do you have to do today? What do you study on? Mr. Long's dad, one of the first American soldiers in Berlin after World War II. Filled out all sides. I think the U.S. history, but I'll let you do it all. I'm not saying I want that paper, but I want that paper. I don't care how you get it. That's just, you know.
What are we doing?
We got to finish up those few more people out there. Make that sound. You can't go back.